The next session we've got is Innovation in the World We Need, and it's led by Geof Rochester. He doesn't need a lot of introduction. He's been here with us several times. He's a kind of co-conspirator with the forum. He's also, like me, a sort of recovering corporate exec, doing his own thing. He's a master, I think, of communications and strategy. He was at WWE, but he wasn't a wrestler, so don't get an autograph for your kids. It's not worth a lot for them. But then he went across to the Nature Conservancy and was the CMO there. And I was talking to Geof last night. It's a great example of this forum where we were sitting listening to Chad, I think it was, and we kind of walked out quietly with our tail between our legs, listening about Canon, and then listening about the trees. And Geof's like, I was the CMO of the Nature Conservancy, and I didn't know that. We thought thinning was a good thing. So it just goes to show that even as the experts in our field, we think we kind of know what we're talking about, and then you listen to the people who really know what they're talking about, and there's like a reset. So that's enough from me. I'm going to introduce Geof. He's going to bring up this great panel of gentlemen now, and then we're going to talk about innovation in the world we need. Geof. Where you going?
Sorry, I have to get a clicker. I'm Geof Rochester. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm really here for three reasons, and I think it's important to establish this right up front. Number one, I'm a big fan of Amy and this conference, and if this is your first time, I hope you're excited. This is probably the third or fourth year I've been here. She does an amazing job of curating a broad array of content, meaningful content. All of us go to several of these conferences, but I'm so proud of the job she and the team do in spurring thought leadership and innovation and really ideas around all of this. Second, I'm here because, as Eamon said, I used to work at the Nature Conservancy. I spent 12 years looking at these issues, and so I'm deeply steeped in the challenges of climate change. And third, I'm passionate about the role of the private sector in solving all these problems. There's no way we get this solved without private sector intervention. You heard earlier. So I'm happy and honored to be leading this panel of three wonderful entrepreneurs. We've got an OG on the group who's been doing this for quite some time. We've got some newbies. Before I introduce the panelists, though, what I'd love to do is just show you a brief video. One of the other reasons I'm here is I sit on the board of a for-profit called App Harvest, and they are a controlled environmental ag company. And they embody what Amy is trying to do with this conference. They presented here in 2017, when, quite frankly, they were just starting off. They just had a dream, and 5 years later, they are realizing their dream. They're one of the largest controlled environmental ag companies in the United States. They have a $150 million facility in eastern Kentucky. They're a B Corp, so they're bringing jobs and hope to one of the poorest parts of the country. They've opened their first facility, and they will be opening 3 more by the end of the year. But to some extent, their vision, their ambition was crafted, honed, reinforced by being at this conference. So Megan, if you guys can show the video for a minute, and then I'll introduce the panelists.
CBS News senior environmental correspondent, that's Ben Tracy, traveled to Kentucky to meet a pioneering young farmer who's also giving his Appalachian community an economic boost.
We build big.
This rectangle of steel and glass stretches for nearly half a mile, and just as you start to take it all in, you realize that's only the half of it.
When we do something, we put our mind to it, we go massive.
Jonathan Webb used to build solar energy projects for the government.
It's like surfing coming down here.
Now the 35-year-old is running one of the largest indoor farming operations in the world, growing row after row after row of tomatoes. This greenhouse is the size of 58 football fields, so big you can't see where it ends.
Do you think of yourself as a farmer? Yeah, this is farming.
Calling it App Harvest isn't just clever tech talk. It's located in Appalachia, just outside Morehead, Kentucky.
Everybody watch out for Central Appalachia. We're absolutely going to be one of the largest fruit and vegetable suppliers of the U.S. in the decades to come.
Climate change is not only altering our weather patterns, but it's changing where and how we grow our food. A lot of our produce comes from California and Mexico. two places now hit with frequent and devastating droughts. Kentucky is getting wetter and has location on its side.
You got it.
Webb believes he and his Orange Army are building a new future for Appalachia.
It's a runaway freight train. Now it's a matter, how big is it going to be? How fast are we going to go?
And that's saying something, given how big it already is.
We at App Harvest have set a goal to be one of the largest food and agriculture producers in the world. We have a workforce that is unmatched.
One of the world's largest agri-tech greenhouses in Morehead, Kentucky.
First of all, I love the flavor. They are so good.
We're not stopping construction for 10 years.
In this community, we're going to have one of the largest strawberry facilities.
We're building a 10-acre leafy green facility.
Our second 2.8 million square foot facility.
Site Selection Magazine ranked us #1 in our region in economic development with over 5 potential projects that would be $1 billion+ in investment.
Morehead is a shining example of what's possible.
Great, thank you very much. And if the panelists can come on out and we'll get started. So I have the honor of being with these three gentlemen, and what's a little bit different about this conversation is a lot of what they're doing is steeped in construction and architecture. To my left, we have Mattie, who is the CEO of, sorry, I have to look at my notes. Okay, great. Mattie's a Sun Valley resident. He was voted 30 under 30. He won TED here, and he's got some interesting thoughts on re-envisioning the materials that we use. He also, Mattie, if you get a chance, I want you to talk about Basecamp and what you're doing with that. To his left, we have Ryan, who's with Origin Materials, and he is their Chief Technology Officer, Ryan. And then we've got Cody, Finke, who's with Brimstone Energy, and he's raised over $60 million. So, Mattie, why don't you go ahead and get us going?
Absolutely. Well, first off, so great to be here. Thanks to Amy Christensen and the Christensen Global team for putting on this event. Very early on in my sort of sustainability career and journey, I actually volunteered at this event and helped put it on behind the scenes. And so to now be on the stage today is quite an honor. So as mentioned, my name is Mattie Mead. I'm the founder and CEO of Hempitecture. We are a sustainable materials company that uses a perhaps unique commodity to create what we believe are some of the most sustainable building materials on the planet. Here behind me, you can see a photo of one of our flagship products, our hemp wool insulation, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Next slide, please. So we are the leading provider of sustainable hemp-based building materials in North America. Why do we do that? Why hemp-based building materials? Well, our non-woven materials, particularly our thermal insulation, they embody carbon dioxide and they make healthier, more energy efficient habitats. Well, in part, it's because it is from a plant-based resource. So when we use plant-based resources to replace things like, say, basalt resources that go into mineral wool or fiberglass, which comes from glass, we're using a lower embodied carbon material that also benefits rural economies, benefits rural farmlands, brings jobs to locations that have been historically overlooked or devoid of economic opportunity. So we do specialize in what we like to call the most sustainable materials on the planet. And yes, as you could probably guess from the name, Hempitecture, building materials, that is our focus market. That is where we are very much so spending our time and research and energy on developing products for that market. But we're using technology that is novel, and that technology allows us to utilize the power of plant-based fiber for many different industries. So some of the other industries that we can serve are the cold freight industry. I loved that video of App Harvest. I thought that was super cool. Getting food from point A to point B, a lot of times it has to keep fresh. It has to remain cold. How do they do that? Insulation. So we intend to foray more into the shipping market to keep food from going into the landfill or being wasted, while also lowering the carbon footprint of companies like, say, Blue Apron, who are sending not just a few hundred packages across the United States, but millions of packages of food across the United States. We are working to scale our materials, our approach right now here in Idaho. The photo that you're seeing here is actually a photo from a trial run that we did on some technology that we've purchased from Italy. And this is actually the first time that we produced hemp wool at full scale using non-woven technology and US grown hemp fiber. Why hemp fiber? There's a number of reasons. Very strong fiber, resilient, but it also, when it's being cultivated, offsets about 10 tons of carbon dioxide per acre. So that means that we're using a carbon negative feedstock for our materials. And when I say that this is happening right now here in Idaho, I truly mean right now. I think in about 30 minutes, there's another container load of manufacturing equipment showing up to our building in Jerome, Idaho. I actually took this photo on my iPhone yesterday. So this is happening now, happening here in Idaho, and looking forward to participating in this conversation and learning more from everyone else here on the panel. So thank you.
Cody?
Awesome, thanks, Mattie. Thanks, Geof. Yes, also super excited to be here. I really appreciate Mattie and Tommy for, I think, helping me get here, and Amy, and I till about a week and a half ago actually lived in the Valley, so this place is really special, and I'm just really glad to be here. So yeah, I'm Cody. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Brimstone, and what we do is we make ordinary Portland cement. So I want with a carbon negative attribute. I want to talk a little bit about cement because people don't think about it very often. So Portland cement, that's what we call, that's like the technical term for cement. Cement is responsible for about 5.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's about the same as cars. Cars are responsible for 6.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a scale of problem that's similar to what electric vehicle manufacturers are dealing with. Another way to say that if the cement industry was a country, it would be the third largest emitter after US and China. When you think about CO2 emissions from buildings, about 40% of the CO2 emissions associated with buildings happen during construction, and really it's during the production of the building materials. So cement is it's a huge, huge part of the greenhouse gas problem, and it's one we don't think about too much. And that's actually one of the reasons why I like it quite a bit, because I'm trying to maximize my utility as a human working on climate change, and working on worked on things is a pretty good way to do that. So basically what sets us apart as a company is we make the exact same material that's conventionally produced, but we invented a new chemical process to make that material so it's carbon negative. We do that by changing the starting material and changing the chemistry, and I won't go into too many details in this context, but happy to talk about the details after, if someone wants to ask. And I brought a little sample to show everyone.
A sample of cement?
Yeah, so in this vial is one of our first trial runs from our lab that's actually over in Oakland, California. And this is ordinary Portland cement. So this is the same thing that you would buy at Home Depot or anywhere else that sells cement. You could not distinguish this from conventionally produced cement, except that this, when produced, is carbon negative. So that's where we're excited. So stage of the company, we're just starting basic engineering on our first sort of demonstration scale plant to make about 1,000 tons of cement per year. That'll be in Reno, Nevada. We just raised money to do that from several groups, including Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is sort of a consortium of Bill Gates and all of his richest friends, as well as Amazon and a few others, and we're excited to scale. And yeah, thanks so much.
Great. And Ryan?
Yeah, let me see the clicker actually.
How about some cement?
Cement too, thanks, yeah. All right, so yeah, happy to be here. This is a great forum, arguably talking about the most important topic that we all face. So I'm Ryan Smith, I'm the CTO and one of the founders of Origin Materials. And Origin's a company that's really focused on transitioning the world to sustainable materials. When we think of, for example, fuels, we often think of them in terms of fossil fuels being the most common form of fuel or energy source that we use. Well, the same is true also of materials. Fossil materials account for a massive amount of the materials that we encounter in everyday life. So, for example, the seats that you guys are sitting on, that we're sitting on, have like a polyester overlay and a polyurethane foam core. That all comes from oil and gas. The nylon and adhesives and dyes that go into a carpet, the paints and coatings on the wall, most of the soft materials in your automobile, the things that we are wearing, our clothing. You think that your jeans are all cotton. Well, the reason they're stretchy these days is because there's polymer in there. So, in food packaging, right? The thing that keeps food sanitary for a long period of time is often something that's been through a chemical reaction in the formation of it. And even sort of paper packaging is often coated with a polymer layer. So these materials are all around us, and they all sort of back into oil and gas. And so Origin's very focused on transitioning that base layer from oil and gas and petro into ultimately biomass, which is a carbon negative feedstock. So that's been our focus. And if we can click forward. Up, too far. There we go. So how much does that account for is the question. And nearly half of all human carbon emissions come from just the stuff, the things that we manufacture. And Origin's really focused on the quarter of those emissions that come from materials derived from fossil fuels, because again, so much of it is actually coming from that base layer. And this is a slide that if I'd known the preceding panel was going to talk about this is exactly what I'm focused on, is the fact that corporate America, or the corporate world, has really changed their stance quite dramatically in the last couple of years. I think it is arguable that the Larry Finke letter that was mentioned by Amanda in the previous panel kind of kicked that, sort of a tipping point that sort of kicked that off. And we see this all the time. So these are, large companies, and this is just, the ones that would fit on a slide. There are, of course, many more. But the kinds of conversations that we have today are very different than what we had even 5 years ago. If you would have, not all of these, but some of these companies, you look on their website 5 years ago, you would have seen a product where they put it in green packaging and drew a little leaf on the container, and we were supposed to all sort of nod our heads and say, yeah, that's good for the environment when it contains some small portion of bio content. You go back to those same websites, those same product pages today, and they have the full life cycle analysis. They've got their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. They've got their targets, what they've done last year, what they're going to do next year. And it's really, it's a strong, good faith effort. And the lovely woman, I think Ellen from HP was explaining to me last night, the SEC is going to be actually holding companies accountable for these claims and these targets. And you get a sense of that. So the conversation's really changed, and we're experiencing that. So how do we do it? We focus on, I love this idea that came from Mark Brand yesterday, this idea of the leftovers, right? Same, cooks and chefs don't have any waste, or if there's waste, it's leftovers. We do the same thing. So, except instead of food, we're looking at some of those kind of leftovers that we talked about yesterday that Chad and Carol were talking about with these forestry products where half of the tree, half the carbon in the tree goes into the paper or the lumber, and the other half just gets wasted. So you end up with these things like forest residuals that are just sitting on the forest floor and ended up getting burned, or it goes to a mill and you end up with mill residuals, and it's just sawdust, or if it's a pulp and paper company, you end up with, they have to make these little 1 inch by 1 inch chips in order to make paper, and anything that isn't that gets burned. So it all gets burned. If you talk about agriculture, when you harvest rice, it goes into a big pile, and they separate the rice from the husk and the hull. And the husk or the hull ends up getting burned in a boiler for energy. It's a huge waste of carbon. If you talk about sugarcane production, they press the cane and they have this big pile of what they call bagasse, which is just biomass, it's carbon. And the thing to think about is that's sequestered CO2, right? I think there was a talk yesterday where they talked about, if we're going to build machines to sequester CO2, it would cost trillions of dollars, right, to do that. We're already doing it. We're just burning it and putting it right back into the atmosphere. That's so stupid. Let's actually use that carbon and sequester it and retain it and use it for products that we're otherwise making out of oil. So that's really what our focus is, and we're using those feedstocks as an input into our process. So we'll use something like wood waste or agricultural waste or even old corrugated cardboard waste that goes into a chemical reaction. We're using the same science and technology that the fossil materials guys have been using for the last century. It's just chemocatalysis, large chemical reactors. We take the same experts that that built the system in the last century are now working with us to build this new system. And we're making some basically building block chemicals that go in and make either identical materials to what you're already buying or better materials, because nature gives us some chemistry that petroleum doesn't have. And so we can take advantage of that and produce materials that are either sort of drop-in identical, you couldn't tell the difference, or actually perform better. So that's Origin's focus. And we went public about a year ago this month, and the response to Origin's approach has been massive. We've driven nearly $7 billion in orders over the last year. We're building our first plant. It comes online next year. This week we won the Green Chemistry Award from the EPA, so we're very excited. And we have a company of really bright chemists and chemical engineers and the operators and people who are really focused on this mission. And so that's our focus.
So if you could, Ryan, to that point, you and I were talking earlier. You started this in 2008. Talk about your inspiration, how you got going. And I want each of you to talk about your journeys. We see these guys, they're amazingly successful. Clearly, it was an instant success, right? So tell us about the trials and tribulations. What inspired you to do this in the first place? And just tell us about your journey.
Yeah, so this was a company formed with my co-founder, John Bissell, who's our CEO, and we identified that we wanted to do this coming right out of college. And the inspiration, the inspiration sort of changed throughout that decade a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it's always, sort of the common core in that, at least for me, has been the idea of taking just what's essentially viewed as waste. It's this idea of using the leftovers where, it's such a low value material that is in such abundance and ends up getting wasted, and moving that into such a higher value product has always been sort of an inspiring idea, because you come out of school and you're like, wow, chemistry can do anything. Why are we just wasting this opportunity to go from something of such low value and bring it up to something that's really valued in society? And so, and sort of recognizing, I think, that we don't have to be locked in and bound by the specific set of chemistries and techniques that the petrochemical industry has developed, that science sort of allows you to do lots of things. And as soon as you get off that beaten path, there's a lot of opportunity to basically take things that we otherwise would have just burned and turn them into really valuable things. And so that just, for every sort of pathway that we've developed inside of the company, it's always had that common theme. And that's always like been the energy, the juice for me to sort of push it forward.
And what was the most difficult moment you faced in your journey?
Oh man, I mean, sort of like when you're early stage and raising money and trying to sort of pull sort of the right members of the team together and get that first customer, those are really challenging to do, and because you're sort of ratcheting, right? You sort of like, you get a customer, which then enables you to sort of get an investor, which then enables you to sort of hire the right person, and you sort of like, and you just ratchet that up. And so, that's a roller coaster, and it's emotional, and it's challenging, and it's, has its ups and downs.
Takes a lot of resilience, right?
Yeah, you really, and for the most, I mean, there were times when it would have, we could have just called it quits, right? Because you don't really see what's around the corner if you're going to make it. But we really just pushed through, and it's been a good journey for us.
Great, Ryan. Sorry, Cody. Same question.
All good. Yeah. So I sort of started from. I entered graduate school as a chemist, trying to think of what I could do to make the world a more equitable more both environmentally and socially place. I started working on wastewater treatment for applications in low-income countries, because I felt like that was a sector that wasn't really worked on that much, but was still quite important both environmentally and socially. And I was convinced by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who was funding that research, that the fastest way to deploy a technology to solve a problem was to start a business. As economic tailwinds, just in the global economic system we have, tend to deploy things fastest if you can do that. So I said, okay, that's interesting. I started looking at the economics of my research, and I found that the economics were dismal, basically. And I, sort of long story short, I looked at other spaces that were not worked on very much, and cement was one of them. And I tried to figure out a process where that if I could meet some reasonable technical milestones, could have economic tailwinds. And came up with the process that we use today, that we're trying to scale today. And from there I was like, okay, well, this seems good. Let's see if we can get some money. And started with Department of Energy, got some money from the Department of Energy to scale this, to do some initial work on this process. Then when she started, through that network, got connected to a bunch of venture capitalists and started fundraising. And our first, our first fundraising session took 9 months of, at least 9 months of folks just asking us questions and sort of trying to tear us apart and everything. And eventually we got, it was fairly stressful, and but luckily we got some money and were able to show the process work to the lab scale, and then the next money was easier. But yeah, we still I wouldn't say that we're successful yet, right? We still haven't made any impact on greenhouse gas emissions. We don't have a scaled plant. We don't have any customers. These are all things that will be in the future once we get to scale. So there's a lot of work ahead, and I'm inspired by these two for sure.
And the same thing.
Well, I mean, I think similar to the other entrepreneurs on this panel, entrepreneurship is an iterative process. It doesn't just, maybe sometimes it starts off with the home run, right, from day one. But for me, Hempitecture began as an undergraduate student studying architecture and environmental sciences. And so kind of at the nexus of those two, I realized that there's this problem. And a problem that I wanted to solve was buildings and their operations are responsible for about 40% of our carbon footprint, which of course cement and concrete production and petroleum-based products make up a portion of, and wanted to solve that through building materials. Now, my journey has been going on since 2012, and it wasn't really until 2018 when I brought on my co-founder, Tommy Gibbons, who's actually a high school classmate of mine, that we really kind of started to reinvent Hempitecture and reimagine what Hempitecture is as a sustainable, scalable company that could grow. And that's kind of where we're at today. We have customers. We just finished a $4.6 million fundraising round. We're building a manufacturing plant in Jerome. But things take time. All good things take time to build.
So with all of you, presumably what you're doing are obvious solutions. They're good for the planet. What more can the government be doing, right, to support what you're doing? For example, in the ag industry, the greenhouse companies, the controlled environmental ag companies are looking for subsidies for what they're doing, not unlike what happened with solar. So in your respective spaces, could the government be doing a lot more? I mean, if this is the right direction, what more can they be doing to support your initiatives?
Well, one thing that I think is really exciting is the opportunity to begin labeling your products. So Hempitecture recently just received a USDA bio-based certification for our installation, which means that there is bio-based content. So the government is starting to create these programs that are allowing companies like ourselves to distinguish our product from another product that might be on the shelf. I think an exciting thing, at least in my space, that's coming is the Carbon Smart Commodities program, which announced, I want to say, almost $5 billion in funding for the cultivation of carbon capturing commodities. And so Hempitecture actually partnered with Oregon State University to put forth a grant proposal that would help bring industrial hemp into larger cropping systems, potatoes, sugar, beets. So we are seeing a beginning to this, but I'm sure in your respective sectors there's necessary inertia, and maybe that is happening or maybe it's not.
Yeah. So for us, what we like to say is, without economic tailwinds, global industrial transitions don't really happen. With economic tailwinds, global industrial transitions take 80 years. And that's fast, right? And we see, look at solar and electric vehicles, we think they're fast. Electric vehicles have been around for over 20 years. They're at 1% or 0.7% of global vehicles. These things are not fast, right? They take 80 years. But they can be fast with appropriate policy, so government can be helpful even for, government, in my view, is necessary, even for companies like I think all of ours, which have economic tailwinds. So some things that we would like to see is, low carbon cement standards, clean cement purchase agreements. The government is the largest purchaser of cement. They consume about 60% of cement. They could, really help us get into the market, but with purchase agreements. They could also do cap and trade systems to
Are they
help with
listening?
transition.
When you go up on Capitol Hill, are they listening?
Well, I've never been to Capitol Hill, but I have talked to some folks that are in Capitol Hill, and I think they're listening. I mean, we'll see. These things take some time. And we've got, our venture capitalists have been very helpful in getting us there. So I think so, but things could be faster. And there also are challenges with procurement. And then some other things that I think just could help the space in general, right? So I like to think all the opportunities that I've had growing up. I went to private school, my parents could pay for it, all these sorts of things. Imagine if, imagine if we redistributed income in a way that everyone in this country could have those types of opportunities. There's so many smart people out there that just don't have the opportunities that I've had. And we could see more people of color, we could see more poor people, or that maybe are not poor, would not be poor anymore, working. We'd have so many awesome brains working on these problems, and I think that's just a bigger systemic thing that government could help with. So.
And then, yeah, I'd say one thing to sort of point out for each of the three companies that are up here is these aren't software companies, right? These are we're working with atoms, and the big difference there is that it often you sort of end up with something that's a very sort of capital intensive kind of business, and so funding from government is I think a really important part of that. It allows earlier stage investors like venture capitalists to get involved, knowing that there are funding pathways to sort of fund these these factories or plants, the projects, when you get to that level of maturity. That's important.
I want to go back to something Cody said that I'm very passionate about, which is income redistribution, what's happening in this country, social status. Can you, Mattie, talk a little bit about Basecamp and your work there, and then extrapolate it to how do we have an army of people like you, entrepreneurs, innovators, tackling these global problems, like thinking about the K through 12 system in this country, what you went through if you guys went to public school or not. So talk about Basecamp, your interest in that, and then expand it to this conversation about how do we inspire others younger to want to have the same kind of ambition and courage that you all have.
Sure. So for those who are not familiar, Idaho Basecamp's a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's located here in Idaho. And they do many things, but one of the things that they do that is so impactful is they bring individuals, generally teens or youths, from inner cities to experience the Idaho wilderness. Many of these kids have never been on a plane before. They've never seen stars at the nighttime. And Idaho Basecamp actually is what brought me to Idaho early on in my career to work on the first Hempitecture proof of concept project. So I'm very passionate about that organization and the benefit that this organization has for these students. And in fact, even today, my relationship with Basecamp has continued as a member of the board of directors, but recently met a young man who worked for Basecamp as a camp counselor, coming out for a summer, and now he works for Hempitecture and lives in Idaho. So to be connected to that network and to be able to help build my business with people that I think we want to be surrounded with and need that opportunity is an incredible opportunity.
Great. Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's, first of all, I love that story. The universities have an important role to play here in sort of helping people who are students to become entrepreneurs. Folks like Stanford, MIT already do this, but really I think the rest of the university system, it can be small steps, business plan competitions, those kinds of entrepreneurial programs go a long way. Certainly sort of oriented us early on when we were trying to figure out, how How do you start a company? What's involved in that? It can go a long way in sort of providing those sort of fundamentals. So I would encourage a lot of that for sure.
Great. So we're at the end of our time, and I just want to say, look, I'm honored to be working with these gentlemen. I think that when you think of all the massive issues we're dealing with climate, this is the kind of thinking, this is the kind of courage, and this is the kind of ambition that we all need. So thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.